to Dallas in this presentation. So I am going to start. Let me share my screen.
And I wanted to let you know that that appears to be working well.
Good, thank you. Thank you so much.
Not always a given with our Zoom age.
And you'll have to, I have to apologize. I'm just now getting used to having two screens and a laptop. So if you see my eyes darting, that's what it's about. The title Heartbroken and Confused came to me from a graduate social work student several years ago. And I do a module on historical trauma and American Indian Alaska Natives. And I asked just for students' responses. And when we had finished the module on Columbus and colonization, she indicated that her response, her thoughts and her feelings were that she was heartbroken at what had happened, the brutality. And then she was also confused because no one had ever shared this history with her before. And so that has lingered in my mind and in my heart. And so that's what I opted to title the presentation today. As President Schuman mentioned, here's where we're going to go in the time that I have with you today. I'm going to tell a little story about the reasons I came to this research, give you just a very brief synopsis of the research that is out there related to historical trauma. I have done a small exploratory study about teaching historical trauma, so I'll share those results with you. And then implications. What does that mean for myself as a social work educator? And I think it can apply to other people as well that work in recruitment and work at the academic level. Okay, this is the University of Colorado at Boulder, and that's where I obtained my undergraduate. And there were many people from the Navajo Nation and from the Lakota Nation that were there, and so I learned a lot, being a fresh-faced Cherokee who was used to being the dominant tribal group. But as I moved there and continued my studies from the University of Tulsa, it was a great learning experience for me. I happened to be in an undergraduate literature course that included the book that you see next to the picture of the University of Colorado. And I hope there's a number of people that are familiar with this book. I'll read a little bit of the description that I found for it. A haunting tale within a tale. It's the harrowing story of the father's survival of the Holocaust. That survival is woven into the author's account of his tortured relationship with his aging father, and the father is the one that was in the Holocaust. It's a backdrop for survivor guilt, and then throughout the story, normal life, there are small arguments and unhappy visits with the father. And it represents the astonishing retelling of cruelty and terror of the Holocaust. And this is what lingered with me. It's a story of survival, not only of the father, but of the children who survived the survivors. And that communicated how things can be passed on generationally. And in this undergraduate class, the majority of the other students were very angry with the son in the story, and they wondered how he could be angry with his father given everything his father had gone through. And my reaction was to state to the class, I don't know who in this class is a first-generation survivor of this type of trauma, but if you are, your parent can end up creating a type of prison of their own for you. And so that took place, it was on a Wednesday. Again, this was 1995 when I was in this class and read this text. Oop, it looks like it took me one further. Oh no, it didn't. And I was struggling as I was pregnant at the time with my first child and the relationship I had with my own mother. And we were estranged at the time as I was bringing this new life, this new generation into the world. I didn't have a mother because she was not very mentally, emotionally healthy. And so this is a picture of Seneca boarding school in Wyandotte, and that's where she attended from 3rd grade to 8th grade. I wanted to keep this picture because it shows the vastness of that boarding school. Some people, I think, have the image of it being very small, maybe a cabin with a few students. But this was a massive production, and the children worked in the dairy farm and they worked in the laundry. It was a very industrial education. And then the picture you see below is a picture of the turn of the century. So this was before my mother's time, but 3 little girls running away from that boarding school, and they had been caught and brought back. And so as I was reading the book in this literature class, I was connecting with the relationship I had with my mother and a lot of the horrors and atrocities that she had experienced at that boarding school. And she would tell me these stories. That very same week, this is one of those moments where things, you can really say this was meant to be. That very same week, the Wyandotte American Indian Student Club had invited Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, and I was the secretary of that group at the time. And so she came, and I didn't really know what she was presenting about. I wasn't familiar with her work. As I said, I was in college and I was pregnant at the time, so I was very busy. And so this is just an excerpt from her work. Her name has become synonymous with historical trauma and unresolved grief. She originally applied it with her tribe, the Lakota, and she has an intervention related to it. So unbeknownst to me, that very same week she came and she presented. And I remember rushing up to her, well, I guess sort of waddling up to her, because as I said, I was pregnant with my first child. And I implored her, I said, what do you do when other people in your family won't accept this type of wounding and how it carries on? And I'll always remember her patting my hand and say, you continue on your path of healing. And so that was a very memorable interaction that I had with her. And as I'm sure many of you know in the room, her work has expanded. And it was also critiqued in the very beginning. In our society, we're very individualistic. It's hard for us to think about how things can emanate and span generations in terms of their implications. And so I wanted to mention there was critique. How do you measure it? How you differentiate from other psychological disorders? But she continued, and here is a critical linkage. Her work was vetted by Eva Fogelman, who worked with Holocaust survivors and their children. And just very briefly, the mechanism for the transmission of the trauma is through the parenting behavior, where the first generation offspring tend to have these type of symptoms: overdependent, difficult, expressing emotion, anger, depression. I want to highlight that some people prove resilient and these things aren't carried on, but you can certainly celebrate that resiliency and also develop compassion for the people that did not fare so well emotionally and psychologically, and in their health, their physical health as well, being in these types of environments that were designed to acculturate them and were very abusive and often very taxing in terms of the loss of life because of the health issues that were there. Thankfully, other researchers came along and conducted focus groups and created a measure. And this is some research that references the types of thoughts that people have, Native people. And this was an adult group, as you can see, 142 tribal individuals, indicated that they thought of alcoholism, which is that very first one, elder respect, language, traditional ways. And they thought of these daily to several times a day. And this is the work of Les Whitbeck that wanted to stay close to the people and did qualitative work and garnered these historical losses. So he has a historical loss scale based within the people in these focus groups. And so this is what he found when he did that work, that initial work to create the measure, and then took it to an adult group. And so I just wanted to share a highlight of what comes across people's minds several times a day. And then he created a historical loss symptom scale. So these are the percentage of emotional responses from that same group. People often feel sad, angry, uncomfortable around white people. They feel shame, loss of concentration, isolated, those types of emotional responses. So again, you have the historical loss. People think of that, and then they respond emotionally. And so it's progressed. There's now measures of it. So that has limited some of the critiques of it, some of the critiques. And just to highlight now Maria's work, it's been delivered, the historical trauma and unresolved grief intervention training has been delivered to several tribes across the country. That lets you know the workshops, articles, book chapters. She's just published a randomized control trial where she used interpersonal therapy and then the historical trauma unresolved grief intervention. So the theory is now known nationally. There's research, evaluations, publications, grant writing, knowledge dissemination. And then also it's at the national level in terms of SAMHSA and Indian Health Service. They have literature related to it. And then also the Department of Health Services has references to historical trauma and being mindful. This work combines with the teaching that I do. Sometimes I think I'm foolish. I've taught human diversity and societal oppression for 17 years now. And from the very beginning to now, graduate students in the class can sometimes react negatively. They can shut down. They've asked me things like, I feel like you're saying white people don't hurt. And that's never been the intention of this work. We're focused on oppression and getting people to a place of healing and wellness. And there's many groups that have experienced, trauma and oppression. But that was my individual experience. And in terms of looking at the literature, that's what's highlighted for you there, not just myself, but other researchers and teachers in social work have noted these types of feelings. It's very difficult, and I truly hope that people that are watching today can connect with the difficulty in walking into someone else's oppression in terms of being presented with it, being presented with your ancestors' role in perpetuating this type of trauma. And so it is difficult, and so I want to honor that and get people to a place where they're not caught in reaction, where they don't shut down, because that's going to eventually do damage to the people that we are trying to help. And so I start an exploratory study just to explore thoughts and feelings. What are people thinking? What are reactions? And that aligns with our CSWE values. And I did get IRB approval for it, given I was the instructor. And I didn't want people to feel pressure to participate. And so we created a way that I would not know who had participated or not. I was assisted by a graduate student. And so we did get approval for that. So it's a small study. There were 16 students in the course. I presented the module, which included some video excerpts, exercises, person environment assessment. The focus was on colonization and the arrival of Columbus. And as I mentioned, I left the room and assured that we didn't know. Students were instructed to put the paper into the envelope and seal it, so not even the graduate assistant would know who had written and who had participated. So for the analysis, myself and a graduate research assistant were both Native American, coded the responses individually. We compared codes, and then we decided on a final coding. And here's what resulted from that analysis. Most people felt sadness, anger. There were a host of other negative reactions, and I don't have my notes right now with me to be able to list those out individually, but you can see that that was the predominant response. People said they felt informed. Some people felt confused. And then some people felt connected. It was an empowered response to use the information they had gained to empower their practice and share the knowledge beyond the class. People tended to stay and report about the brutality. That was the thought, the brutal conditions of colonization, the brutality that was inflicted on the Taino people. The next response, never learned. And so these are graduate students that have a range of age. So I think it still points to the need that we still need to educate on the reality of what happened. People had the next one you see here related to Columbus. These were thoughts and reactions, particularly to Columbus. And as a social work professor, I had to remind folks is that might be easy to be angry at the individual's reactions, and definitely stirs anger within me as well. But there's a system that's supporting this colonization, and as social workers, we need to move up to that macro level to evaluate those symptoms so that these types of things don't happen again. Action is the next one. So people wanted to think of what they could do after this presentation and how they could impact tribal groups and communities and nations. And then power. There were a lot of students that were focused on the power dynamics and who ended up wielding their power and continuing that after contact. So implications, there's a range of cognitive and affective reactions immediately following this historical trauma training module. I'd like to study it with a standardized measure. There is an empathy scale that is designed to be used with different ethnic groups. And so that was something I'd like to pursue. The questions that remain: do these cognitive and affective reactions depend on the perpetrators of the historical trauma? I have not yet coded the later historical trauma modules that involve the United States government. This one was specifically related to Columbus. And so knowing that the perpetrators were members of the United States, does that impact those thoughts and those feelings that come? And then the impact of processing after the historical trauma content, short term, immediately after, and then longer term. I think there's a difference. I hypothesize there's a difference. The pictures that you see before you are very similar, and one is related to the Holocaust, and the other is related to the Wounded Knee Massacre for the Lakota people predominantly. So I think it might be harder to accept those things and stir different reactions and emotions. And that is all I have.
Well, thank you. I'd like to ask one question, and before we see, I mean, if people have, our audience has questions, feel free to put in the Q&A or the chat. Dr. Byers, you showed us a photo of I think you called it the Wyandotte boarding school where your mother attended from 3rd through 8th grade.
Yes, the Seneca boarding school in Wyandotte, Oklahoma.
I'm sorry, Seneca boarding school in Wyandotte. Okay. I was curious about her experience. Did like she or her parents choose for her to go there, or was she forcibly sent there?
Thank you so much for asking that question. My mother always had a lot of hatred for my grandmother for sending her there. And when I would talk to my grandmother, and I mentioned that to her, to my grandmother, I said, you know, Mom's really angry. And she said, you know what? She said, I didn't have a choice. We didn't have food. We didn't have shelter. And I was told that they would be fed, they would be clothed, and they would be able to go to school. And so they weren't forcibly taken, but the conditions and the fragmentation had settled into my family so deeply that she felt that was her only choice. And so she was there a long time. I thought she'd only been there a year, but she, you know, told me some of the things that happened to her while she was there, and they weren't pretty. And she would threaten me and tell me that she would send me to that type of boarding school. So that's the, you know, generational trauma that gets passed down. I knew what would happen to me if I went there based on the stories. And so for her to use that, you know, that's how I connected with the story that I showed. And I hope I'm saying it right. Mouse.
Oh, people say mouse. Yeah.
Mouse.
Moss. Yeah. I don't know.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, I also wondered, well, there's a question from the audience about if you know if the school is still in operation, for one thing. And I also wondered, you said your mother went there from 3rd through 8th grade. Did she go to high school, or did she go to public? No. Okay. She didn't go to high school.
Yeah, so she graduated with an 8th grade education and married a man that could not read or write. So it's kind of amazing that I ended up where I am, given that lack of formal education in my family. And I know I'm not the only one. I know other people have done it.
And you sort of nodded, but the school's no longer in operation?
No, it's no longer in operation. I'm thinking that I read that there was another building that one of the buildings had survived and it was used for like a museum. And but it's not that long ago that it was operational. If you Google Seneca boarding school, it's also referenced as industrial school. It will pop up a video of a man that went there in the 70s. And I had a student in my class that actually went there. She was about 10 years older than me, so she would have been 60. And she went there. And hopefully the conditions were better, but from the few things that this one student told me, that there was still a lot of abuse going on. If you find that video, he just kind of tells it without a lot of emotion about his time there and talks about some losses that occurred there, but you don't get the sense that it was this majorly traumatic experience. But again, you're talking about a little boy that was taken away from his mother and father, that left them to be at this school. And just like my mother, she'd just report things that had happened there without any emotion. So that numbing had definitely set in for my mother. And I think that possibly we need to be aware of that with other people that have been.
One more question here about, I guess the questioner is asking, I think, about your mom. How does your mom feel about the boarding schools being run by Native tribal members now?
She's passed away, and so we didn't get to have a chance to have that conversation. I would hope and I would think that she would feel better about that because she was very connected to herself as being Cherokee and talked a lot about the discrimination, as I mentioned, the trauma that was there. So I can say with a lot of certainty that she would be happy that tribal people were running it, tribal people that were connected to their culture and aware of how important children are to the tribe and to our future.
So one audience member pointed out that children in your, it sounds like in your mom's case, your grandmother was faced with this really, dilemma, for her survival, the survival of the family, and made that choice. But one audience member points out children were often removed forcibly from homes for assimilation purposes. And the U.S. government ran those schools, but now the tribes have taken over the schools, as you alluded to. And so the original questioner wants to know, since your mother has passed away, what are, I guess, your thoughts on tribal boarding schools now, in any aspect, or how they're handling, is historical trauma something that's acknowledged or taught, or where does that fit in?
That is an excellent point. My grandmother said said they had to go, and so you question the option of a choice. If generationally you've had this oppression that renders a people taken from their homelands, taken from their, traditional way of providing food and health and spirituality. I mean, what is a choice against that backdrop of generational oppression? And there are, forcibly. I have a quote in my presentations from the Indian agent, which was white and appointed by the government, that said, "We will show up at your door with guns and say, give us your children. And if you do not," and so, yeah, it was forcibly. There was a law that came out that said it was after the 1900s that you outlawed kidnapping of Native children. So if they had to make a law, it was going on. And it's just a horrible history. They were very smart to kill this culture. We have to take those kids away from their families. And that will be something that Dallas can speak to with the, programs that led to the Indian Child Welfare Act, where it was, we need white people to take these kids so that you can save them from their poor lives. And that was another form of acculturation and assimilation that, was happening in the 60s. And to the extent that people don't honor ICWA, it's still going on. In terms of what I'm most happy about is the students that I have that take the certificate courses for social work with American Indians. And they talk about how their tribal nations that they work for now require them to know the history. Like they'll have trainings and they'll have seminars for those that don't know the tribal history to be connected to it. And then also to the oppression that happened. and to be aware and mindful of that, and to have that in your hand and have that in your heart when you start developing and carrying out these programs. That is such a great foundation to changing and altering education, mental health, behavioral health, every kind of program that tribes offer now.
There's a comment from an audience member who said, I have talked with boarding schools that are still in operation. And since the tribes have taken back the boarding schools, they are wonderful in trying to educate and further students' chances in higher education. And so thanks to our audience member for that comment. And Dr. Byers, thank you for your work and for your presentation. That was really wonderful and very well done, neatly encapsulated in a short amount of time. And for sharing your work with us, because it's really, really interesting. And I think, many of us on campus, since we're all in our different departments, colleges, et cetera, don't often know. So this is a wonderful feature of this series. And you gave the nice segue to Dallas to talk about the Center for Tribal Social Work. And so Dallas Pettigrew, take it away.
Thank you very much. To the host of Medical Mondays, this is a little different, right? This is like Trauma Tuesdays now. So thank you, Dr. Byers, for bringing us down by reminding us of the traumatic history that we've all endured. And I mean that. I'm trying to make it a little bit lighthearted because it's actually very heavy, and it's sad that we still deal with it. So good afternoon, everybody. I am Dallas Pettigrew. I'm a member of the faculty, but I'm also a member of the Cherokee Nation here in Oklahoma. My pronouns are he, him, and his. So today I want to share with you some information about the work we're doing in the School of Social Work to build relationships and collaborate with tribal nations in Oklahoma and beyond, by the way. But the first thing we should talk about is that Oklahoma was and is Indian country. This map is available at native-land.ca. It's a website where you can type in your address and it'll show you all the jurisdictions or all of the reservations or all the tribal lands that are where you are now. So here you can kind of see a crude outline of Oklahoma. I've drawn it in for you as roughly as that is. But you can see that this land once belonged to Caddo and Kiowa. Even a band of the Sioux tribe had established their homeland here long before anyone came from the seas to join us. Now this is land that is the Muskogee Creek Reservation, and it joins the Osage Nation Reservation and the Cherokee Nation Reservation. They all join right there in Tulsa near our campus. So you can see here that these maps indicate what was called Indian country for a while, and unassigned territory and Indian territory. So you probably took Oklahoma history for a semester in 9th grade if you grew up in Oklahoma like I did. So you know that there was probably this chance that these dark red areas, which are the jurisdictions of the 5 civilized tribes, I say that with air quotes, that's what the federal government called them. Those tribes were all relocated here forcibly from the southeastern United States to here. And there was a time leading up to Oklahoma statehood when there was an idea that these 5 tribes would become a state of their own called the state of Sequoia. There are even maps out there that show the state of Sequoia, but it never came to fruition. So those tribes still exist, and this is also now the home of 38 federally recognized tribes, and there have been more and there have been fewer. Recognition comes and goes, sadly, through tribes. So how did those tribes get here? Sadly, through the Trails of Tears. Now, I'm a Cherokee tribal member. I can't speak on behalf of all the tribes in Oklahoma, but because I'm Cherokee and I know more about Cherokee history, I'll tell you the Cherokee story. But this is not the only story in the state. So these lines all indicate the Trails of Tears the Cherokee people took as they walked from their homelands of northern Georgia, western North Carolina, and eastern Tennessee. They took all these different ways to come to Indian territory where they were pushed to go because of President Jackson's Indian Removal Act, which he signed in 1830. So here's the thing about that. He signed this act because the state of Georgia, they really wanted the land the Cherokee people were on because they believed that there was gold under their land. And so they said, we want that land and get out. And so the Cherokee people said, no, we're not going. And they filed a lawsuit. Well, the lawsuit got thrown out because until 1924, Native American people were not considered citizens of the United States. And so at that time, there was no standing for them in a court of law. Samuel Worcester was a missionary who lived with the Cherokee people in Georgia. And so he filed a lawsuit on the behalf of the Cherokee Nation saying, Georgia, you can't have this land. The Supreme Court heard the case and actually found in favor of Mr. Worcester, which was one of the rare times that the Supreme Court found in favor of Native people in this country. So Chief Justice John Marshall said, no, we have treaties that have given and promised this land to the Cherokee people. We said we've never tried to take it from them. So no, Georgia, you can't have it. Well, President Jackson didn't really care for that decision. And so he is reported to have said, John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. So President Jackson went about rounding up the Cherokee people. He gathered them all up and put them in stockades and prepared them for the long walk, which began in the winter between 1838 and 1839. They rounded up around 16,000 Cherokee people and sent them on their way. Along the way, about 4,000 people died, mostly elders and children, and they were buried all along the Trails of Tears. And that's why they called it the Trail of Tears, because there were so many tears shed. So I used to work in Cherokee, North Carolina, which is now where the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians Reservation is. And I've driven back and forth from there to home here in Oklahoma. And it is a long, long drive, and I drive fast. I cannot even imagine walking it in the middle of winter, carrying everything I own on my back. So when Dr. Byers talks about historical trauma and grief, this is one good example. So we'll move on a little bit to the next thing, which is some bright spots. When the tribes arrived here in 1839, they began to reestablish their communities and their cultural grounds and their villages and their governance structures, but most importantly, their schools. The Cherokee people built 144 elementary schools all across the land that they had in their possession in Oklahoma, before it was called Oklahoma, including 2 institutions of higher education. The Cherokee National Male Seminary, which burned down, was rebuilt and burned down again, and then the Cherokee National Female Seminary, which you can see in the picture there. So this was the first institution of higher education for women west of the Mississippi River, and regardless of the population, it was the first one. So that was great, but then preparing for statehood, the people who would eventually become Oklahomans took away those schools, including the colleges, the 2 institutions of higher education. And that building is now Seminary Hall at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, where I had several classes in undergrad. It was really, neat to be in that building that had been there for so long and was built by the people who moved here before this was a state. But it was also frustrating that it was not in their possession anymore. So just another map that shows where the tribes are currently located in Oklahoma. There are 38 federally recognized tribes. You can see all those colors on the map are those tribes. I just want to really push home that this is Indian country. Oklahoma is Indian country. So just put your eyes on the spot where you know Tulsa to be. You can see that right there. That's the Muskogee Creek Nation Tribal Reservation. And you can see where OU is by looking right there. Did you like my animation? I'm so proud of myself for this thing. So yeah, we're right there at the northern end of the reservation of the Muskogee Creek Nation. This is literally Indian country, as the last Supreme Court decision regarding McGirt has proven to us. So OU is really important to Indian country, and Indian country is important to OU. And we're showing that with our social work faculty. There's Dr. Lisa Byers, who you just listened to. She is a member of the Cherokee Nation and joined the faculty. She's also really prestigious, you guys. I don't know if you know this, but she was the first American Indian to earn a doctorate through the George Warren Brown School of Social Work at Washington University in St. Louis, which is a fancy and beautiful school, by the way. It's a big deal. Dr. Byers has lived a life that is important, and I'm happy to be her colleague. She, started that graduate certificate and did so many other things to try to reach out to the Native American population. And the school hired some other indigenous faculty, including Rick Munoz and me. We're both members of the Cherokee Nation. And then whenever I was hired, our director, Dr. Miller Cribbs, said, I want you to build relationships with tribes and try to recruit more tribal students into our program. And so it was amazing that I was hired intentionally to build relationships with tribes because they're important. So we started doing that early on with the Bureau of Indian Affairs funded project. And this is a picture of a meeting we had with tribal child welfare leaders from across the state. We were trying to build a relationship with them where we could help them train themselves. We thought if we brought their expertise to the table and we brought the resources of the university, including the simulation center, we could probably help them design a training that they could deliver to their own people that would help them deliver the best services possible to the members of their tribes. Because what we believe is that tribes know best what works for tribes. So we wanted to support and enable and empower that. And it worked out really well. We did that for a while. We had $150,000 in Bureau of Indian Affairs funding to support this work. We did, I think, 13 rounds of training with local tribes. Plus, we did 2 rounds of training with the regional social workers for the Bureau of Indian Affairs who came from as far away as Alaska to our simulation center to go through the training. And that was really good for us. Oh yeah, there's our roadmap. Those are the things that we did over that time. And then the funding ended, but there were some really important things that happened. We got to build a new Center for Tribal Social Work. This has been a dream of lots of people for a long time. And I'm just happy to be a part of its creation. We have established some goals. We want tribal members to receive the best social work services, not necessarily from us or from non-tribal members, but we want them to receive them no matter where they come from. So if they're going to get them from non-tribal members at first, fine. But let's also train tribal members to deliver those best services to their own communities and their own people. We hope to eliminate negative disparities among all tribal members. And sometimes the disparities are astronomical, like life expectancy. There was a report a few years ago that said that the shortest life expectancy in the United States was in Stillwell, Oklahoma, 53.6 years. There were 2 more Oklahoma towns in the top 10 for shortest life expectancy, and they were Shakota and Eufaula. Those are all 3 of those are towns with very high tribal populations, and we want to fix that. There's been some dispute about whether those numbers are accurate. Regardless, we know that there are things there that need to be addressed. We also want to recruit and retain and graduate more tribal members with their social work degrees. We want to work with tribes to develop training and workforce development for them and with them. And we want to develop a research agenda with tribes because it's hard for them to get people who will do that ethically and respectfully and understands what Indian country is really like. So we have a new approach. We understand this need. Tribes have had access to training for a while, but they don't typically like it because it's not always culturally sensitive and it's often condescending, in fact. It thinks that tribal members are backwards and they're not sophisticated and they don't know anything. And the fact is that is so wrong. It could be that they don't have access to a lot of stuff, but they're smart people and they know what they're doing. The training they often get is not, it does not respect tribal sovereignty or doesn't even understand it. It may perpetuate stereotypes about tribal people. It ignores historical trauma, and it's generic thinking that tribes are all the same, and they are not. So we started doing this training, and we have our own training style, which is not prescriptive. We don't tell people how they have to do things at their tribes. We try to involve them in all parts of the training, from the designing to the delivery of it. So often we're mostly facilitating, and we'll do some research and we'll make copies of things for people and we'll help with the evaluation of the training. But we try to stay up to date on all the latest court decisions that impact Indian country, like McGirt. We really honor tribal approaches to doing things. So we respect non-Western healing styles and non-Western ways to do things. And absolutely, more than anything, everything we do builds on relationships. So it's our relationships with these friends in tribes that has helped us reach out to more tribes and be more successful. It's also helped us bring more students into the program. This is a snap. I know you can't read this because the type is small, but this is just an idea of sort of the commitments that we've made to tribes. Briefly, I'll just say this. We only conduct research after we have tribal IRB approval. The institutional review board of the tribe is important to us every bit as much as the one from OU. So we'll work with both of the IRBs before we'll do any kind of research or publication about the work we do with tribes. We don't publish anything without the tribe's approval. And it may be just, well, it's never just the IRB, it's also our team, our partners at the tribes who've contributed to the work. And we, in fact, not only just want their approval, we want them to be co-authors, even lead authors, if that's possible. We want to push them to the front, and we don't need to take that attention, and we don't clamor for it. We try to be 100% transparent in every single thing. If we need to charge for any of the services we provide, which we really try not to do, we are very clear on where that money is going and what it pays for. But really, we've been really successful raising funds so that this training doesn't cost tribes anything at all. We only train the things that tribes want to learn. There's no point in taking things to tribes and saying, here's what you need to learn and how you need to do things, because they will reject it. And it's not a good way to do business at all. It's not respectful. We always accept input from tribal experts. We covet that. We ask for it. We would love to have more of it. And if we ever get any accolades, we definitely want to share that with our tribal friends and partners, because without them, we'd be nothing. Finally, we approach everything we do with tribes with humility. Everything we do with tribes, we do specifically for that tribe, considering their own culture and history. And we do that as humbly as possible. So we've built a reputation, and that reputation has led to some opportunities. One of those is last year, the state of Oklahoma decided to revamp the training they provide to all their child welfare workers. It's called CORE training. And the School of Social Work is actually leading on that. And we were given an opportunity to invite tribal child welfare professionals to look at the CORE curricula and insert tribal language everywhere it needs to be inserted. So there used to be like a, I don't know, 3-hour module on working with tribes on one of the days of the training, which is 6 weeks long. That's great. But there are different parts of the training that are differently applied to tribal people all throughout. And so we got a chance to contribute to that, and that was amazing. It's improving the state's interactions with tribal people. And then the other picture there on the right, that's Paula David from Harov Institute. She's an internationally known trainer on trauma, and she's brilliant. And we were able to connect her to Cherokee Nation just because of the relationships we have and the reputation we've built. Harov Institute, Harov USA through OU, and the Cherokee Nation right here in Oklahoma are now friends because of the work we've been able to do with them both. So again, about the Bureau of Indian Affairs, this is our team of tribal members who helped us create their training and deliver it. And that $150,000 was spent well. But we've also got more money. The National Child Welfare Workforce Institute has awarded a grant to the Muskogee Creek Nation and OU, because we applied together, for $650,000 for 4 years. This money is used to give scholarships to students who agree to repay those scholarships by working in tribal child welfare programs upon their graduation. So every year of funding they receive is a year that they'll work for the tribe. This is intended to professionalize the workforce, but also make higher education accessible to people who might not get it when they work at tribal programs right now. So I can tell you we've got 10 students in the program right now. We've spent $314,000 so far. We're getting full rides for most of them, $32,000, $33,000 for their master's degree in social work. And they're gonna get to go work with the people they know and love the best. So it's incredible to get to be a part of that. Here, I'm gonna give you a little snapshot of our signing day video. We have them sign a contract whenever they get their award. It's sort of like a Division I athlete in college. So I'll share this with you. the Imagine Dragons for their song that supports that. I hope you could hear the music, okay? We didn't ask them for permission, so don't tell them, but we sure appreciate them. We're really proud of our NICWE students. Whoops, whoops, whoops. They're amazing, but we've also known that they've got some challenges. Most of them, well, I think all of them are first generation college students and certainly first generation grad school students, and they needed support. So we thought we'd give them an academic auntie. The auntie is a traditional role that's pretty important in most families, in Indian country for sure, but I think probably in a lot of our families. You probably have an auntie who's like the baby of your parents, siblings, and she's just a lot cooler than your parents because she's younger and hipper, and maybe when she came along, the family was more financially stable, and so she got to go to college or whatever, and she just knows things. And she's the one you can get like dating advice from, and she goes to cool concerts and she knows how to dress and everything like that. So you go to her for advice, but she will also get right up in your face if you need that, right? She will put a knot in your tail if you need that. Well, we thought we needed that at OU. So we hired Courtney Bolt, Citizen Potawatomi citizen, to be the academic auntie for all the tribal students in our program and other students too. We're not going to hide her from everybody else. But Courtney fills that role. So she's an extra advisor. She's another safe, happy person that the students can talk to if they don't know, how do I find out about financial aid? One of our students, so we're having a photo shoot for our students who have to have headshots. And we told them dress in business casual and different colors and whatever. We didn't think about it. I didn't. One of our students didn't know what business casual was. And that student was able to go to Courtney and say, what is business casual? And Courtney not only explained it, but she took her shopping and they found business casual clothes. And that student told Courtney that she's never felt so confident in her life. And my gosh, that makes all of it matter more. So important, the work that Courtney does. We got another $750,000 from the Capacity Building Center for Tribes to take our training across the country, deliver it to tribes everywhere. We've got $60,000 in counting from Casey Family Programs to just make everything better. It started with a gift to just launch the Center for Tribal Social Work, but also $25,000 per year indefinitely that we can use to keep the work going. Please ignore the sound of my alarm beeping at me. We had the first ever Child Welfare Appreciation Day where we had Chief Gary Batten speak to our audience with other closing remarks by Dr. Deb Shropshire. So we wanted to elevate the tribes to the same level as the state and make sure that everyone knew that we thought of them as equal and that they're all important and they matter to us. We gave out 6 different awards. We gave one for Distinguished Career, Early Career, and Social Work Student with the promise to go to work in child welfare. We gave one of each to a tribal candidate and a state candidate. And here are our winners. We're very proud of them all. So we made sure that we didn't recognize the state more than the tribe or the tribes more than the states. And that's important in the way that we do business because we think they all matter. So now I'm gonna ask you to ask any questions you want. Here's some ideas of some future plans while you're thinking of your questions. Anyone?
Thank you so much, Dallas. That was really interesting. And it just seems, it's such a positive set of messages because it seems like the center has been really successful in both establishing itself and getting grants. Yeah. And I really appreciate you showing the signing video because I was fortunate enough to be included and be part of what I think was the first signing ceremony when we could do things in person. And we had it over in faculty staff lounge, a year or so ago. Judging from the video, it seems like, is it safe to say year over year there was programmatic growth or you had more students coming in for the MSW?
Yeah. We had 5 the first year and we had 6 the second year, but we also had everybody sign a new contract. So you saw 10 people signing there.
Okay.
That's why it's growing. We're gonna add more and more.
So tell us what the obligations of the students who are receiving scholarships, are they required to then, like for each year of education, provide a year of service to the tribal nation? Or, is it an expectation or is it just a loose agreement or what kinds of,
that's right. It's a contract. It's a contract. And if they don't fulfill their obligation to go pay back their 1 year at the Tribal Child Welfare Program for each year of education that was paid for, the university is supposed to go back and collect those scholarship dollars back from them. So we hope that we never have to encounter that. Mostly we won't because these folks already work at their tribal child welfare programs for the most part. But if they decide to just walk with that degree, OU is supposed to go back and collect.
I was also wondering if, I don't know if you can go back to the slide where it was sort of a roadmap of that was Bureau of Indian Affairs, right? The original grant?
Yeah, the very first bucket of money we got was from the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
And so I guess one natural question that seems to pop up for me, I mean, you mentioned these other national institutes and workforce centers and capacity building. Those are amazing grants. So I guess I was wondering, BIA seems like a very big source, a big governmental source of possible grant funding or research support or programmatic support. So I guess the question is that something in the works where you could reapply or develop? And you had, and I don't mean to make you switch slides so much, but on your final slide, you do have all these new directions you want to go in. Is that a possibility for future grants or research or scholarship or programs?
Absolutely. The Bureau wanted to give us more money, but COVID disrupted their plans. So they've had to redirect some of their funds to do other kinds of things. But they have intended fully to support us at least $150,000 a year indefinitely, and especially because we're going to address more than just child welfare. We're going to spread into all of those areas where tribes provide social services to their members.
Wow. Well, I just want to also say thank you for presenting, but also congratulations, because this is tremendous success, and it just reflects, I mean, being selfish, it reflects so well on the university and specifically on OU-Tulsa, and I've, interacted with you and the relationship with Harub. I mean, it's been, I was glad you referenced it. It's been wonderful. We have a couple of questions from our audience, which I'm happy to ask here. Let's see. So one person has asked, makes the comment, I love where social work and law overlap and would love to be involved in the tribal legal system rather than child welfare. Will that be possible as a Native member like child welfare? I don't know if I asked that properly. Does that make sense?
I love where you're going with that. I think there's lots of opportunities to work in the law and social services for tribes. Child welfare is one place where that happens, but there are many, many others. And I'd direct you to the tribal attorneys general for more information on that. And if you want help finding some of those, just send me an email.
I know that current Cherokee Chief Chuck Hoskin, if I'm not mistaken, is an OU law grad, so he has a legal background. And I know he was, I forgot, was he Secretary of State or something before he became Principal Chief?
That's
so
right.
I don't know, he was an Attorney General, but he had a high up title.
That's right.
For whatever that's worth. Okay, we have a question here, which I don't know if you can answer, but it says, with the 1833 treaty, I don't know if that was referring more to the Supreme Court case you alluded to. Do you feel as though tribal members will benefit in the criminal justice system as federal courts serve 100%, I think, for tribal nations, I think based on the McGirt decision? Have we seen, and I may be asking this wrong, have we seen if that has been a positive or negative impact?
I'll say that answer is a little above my pay grade.
Okay, I was wondering.
My personal opinion is it's good that we recognize tribal sovereignty in every opportunity. And I think that it's going to be beneficial and it's not as scary as some folks are thinking it might be.
Okay. Another question has asked, kind of off topic, but with mental health issues within the tribe, are they addressed or swept under the rug?
They're absolutely addressed. Some of the most innovative mental health programs in the country are happening in Indian country. The Hero Project at Cherokee Nation is one of my favorite examples because I got to start it out when I graduated from OU. It still goes on, and it is the first very comprehensive, all-inclusive children's behavioral health system in the United States, and it serves thousands of tribal members. And it's not just for children now, it expands all the way up for the entire lifespan. All the tribes run their own behavioral health programs, and they run them well.
There was a clarification on one of the previous questions about, I guess potentially would there be scholarships like there are for child welfare for tribal law? And so Dr. Miller-Cribbs, the director of the Anna Henry Zarrow School of Social Work, pointed out that OU Norman has an online Native law program, but I'll let Dallas, you can answer that question if you know of potential scholarships.
I don't have any yet, but you show me where I can apply and we'll see what we can do.
Let's see. So this will be the last question and then a couple comments to wrap up. Do you have to work for Muskogee Creek Nation or any tribe as long in ICW?
Yeah, so Muskogee Creek Nation is our funding partner in that, and they're actually the grantee. So they get like first choice, hopefully, but we already have one who's working at the Osage tribe and another working for the Seminole Nation. So it's not limited just to Muskogee Creek, but because of McGirt, they're going to need to add dozens of new child welfare professionals. So we're hoping to help them staff up.
Okay. I wanted to give one update from Dr. Byers, who I guess in a follow-up to discussing tribal schools, said that basically right as of now, according to the Bureau of Indian Education, they're providing educational services in 23 states, and that currently 130 of the 169, which is 71%, are tribally controlled. So there are some that are still, I guess, not tribally controlled, but this doesn't address, whether that's the federal government or who's operating those schools. But one would hope, I suppose, that we're in a more enlightened age and we wouldn't be taking people away. And then there are numerous comments from many people thanking you both, Lisa Byers and Dallas Pettigrew, for presenting here today, including one I will just read. There are many thanking you and saying you rock. One here says that congratulations on all the success. Our social work programs are a treasure for our campus. And I wholeheartedly agree, feel the same way. And I want to thank you both very much for presenting. And I thank all of our attendees for participating here at our reboot of the Presidential Research Series. So thank you all very much.
You're welcome, and thank you for having us. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. It was our pleasure. Thank you. It was great. Your messages were great. I should say too that this has been recorded and we'll share this seminar. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.